how black women are also more affected. If we have to look at the expanded unemployment rate within the first quarter of 2021, it revealed that the expanded unemployment rate for women, black women in particular, was sitting at something like 51%. That means that about 51% of women who are capable to be in the labor force are not working. Certainly that further, exacerbates the poverty realities of particularly black women in this country.
Yes, I fully agree that really COVID has actually widened not only the gap in terms of inequality, but it has actually widened the gap in terms of poverty in our country, in South Africa, which has always been there. But I think COVID-19 has actually exposed more black women in particular, because you will find that most of those women are usually employed at a middle management, but also at a lower management levels. So when the many institutions as well as private institutions started looking at the lockdown, the regulations, and trying to adhere and comply with those regulations, most of what happened was to actually make sure that with the winding down of most of the work and people working from home, women were predominantly affected by the decisions that were made in those aspects. And I also just want to say that it did not only widen these gaps at the workplace, but also, I think if you look at the issues of unequal society in our country, you will find that a lot of women, still have issues of unequal access to education, to employment opportunities, but also business opportunities. And you will find that a lot of women who have been running their own businesses, small businesses, like in the form of, selling in the streets, in the form of, running their own hair salons. All of these businesses were at some point, affected by COVID, because they had to actually shut down because of COVID-19 regulations. And a lot of women were affected by such decisions. Yeah. And I just want to quickly mention one thing. We have always been grappling with something that we call unequal pay for the equal work of equal value, and I know that this is something that we have been in conversation with. This is something that the Commission for Gender Equality has been investigating in terms of the averages of women who are not getting paid as equal as men are, or their male counterparts. If you look at the statistics currently, Statistics South Africa is actually still giving the figures of 29% gap between women earnings, if you can compare this to their male counterparts. And I know that during COVID-19 period, a lot of women had to stay at home, care for the children who were not going to school, do a lot of homework. And they actually lost quite a lot in terms of, the earnings, if you count or calculate by the hours that they put in, because of the care work, the unpaid care work that they are actually doing at home, even caring for the sick.
Yeah, but then, ladies, I'm sure you can imagine that it becomes exhausting talking about the same issue year on year on year. And it furthermore becomes exhausting to almost feel as though the plight of women and the realities of women get cast a spotlight come the 9th of August. And then we've got the entire year to forget about the problem. And then we come back the next year and we have to debate the same things. So what must we do to change the status quo? Does that mean we need to call for more, policies to be in favor of women, to level the playing field? And what happens if those callings for the policies don't actually get listened to? Terry, maybe you can weigh in on that, because I tell you one thing, for us to talk about the same thing year on year on year, and it appears as though it gets some kind of attention for about 2 days come between the 9th and the 11th of August, it's really disheartening, really, as a woman in this country.
As a woman, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that Women's Day is a complete fallacy. The fact that we have one day that we're supposed to celebrate women, and the other 364 women are treated as badly as Tamara and you just suggested. The thing is, Faith, we do have policies. We have actually very good policies around equal pay for work of equal value, and we have policies around employment equity, skills development, etc. The problem lies with the fact that these policies are not being implemented, and where they are being implemented, they're not being effectively monitored by the Department of Labour and Employment. So, I don't think that creating further policies is really going to make much difference. We have all the policies we need, but what we don't have is implementation of the policies and a careful monitoring and evaluation of how well these policies are being implemented. I think that's the key.
And Tamara, to that point, does this also call for a more united front amongst women? And particularly, as I was mentioning earlier, around the figures of black women being unemployed in this country, does that mean we need a more united voice amongst black women to advocate for the enforcement and the implementation and the subsequent monitoring of these policies? And oftentimes they refer to a Queen Bee syndrome, which was started in 1976 or so, regarding how one woman would get to the top of the food chain and the door would close onto other women simply because of the scarcity and opportunities. Are we still facing a similar fate, especially in the South African context?
Absolutely, I agree with that, Faith. If you look at what has been happening, and if we remember the women who marched to the Union buildings in 1956, one of the things that they got right was to actually make sure that they mobilize one another, each other. And I think that mobilization, and I always get amazed talking about how they did it, because there were no cell phones, there were no SMSs, there were no WhatsApps, there were no emails, but they managed to actually mobilize themselves, bring different movements across racial, groups. There were Indians, there were white, there were black, there were, all colors, irrespective of creed, religion. Women came together and they were managed to be mobilized towards one vision and one vision only. And again, I think this is also something that we can look at, women these days, to say that we need to look at establishing and or strengthening the existing strong movements that are there, that are actually looking at, uplifting, women's issues that seem to actually these days be, cross-sectional and or issues that we know that they are about addressing gender inequality and inequalities in general. So we need those strong movements to actually stand up. We need to speak. Those who have voices and those that are actually sitting in the boardrooms, those that are actually in the leadership and decision-making positions, to actually be able to speak for those that are voiceless. We need to actually come together and make sure that we form strong movements and we form strong voices that will speak for an ordinary woman who is in the rural area, in Kwamakagazi, a rural area in Ndwedwe, or a rural area anywhere where a woman who cannot actually, come across to a traditional sitting to actually talk about her issues of abuse, her issues of poor access to markets, to various issues. So that, these voices are heard, but also we are able to, as civil society organizations, stand up and actually hold government to account if we feel that government is not actually complying and not accounting for transformation that we want to see in South Africa and Africa as a continent.
Well, then, building from your point then, Tamara, Terry, does that mean that also we as women need to take a little bit of a moment of reflection on perhaps the haves versus those who have and versus those who have not? The privilege, almost as though there's some kind of privilege that exists within women, where if I'm okay with my 4, then I don't need any more. How then do we start looking outwards, almost to say, in being able to tackle some of those issues, as Tamara was making a point, even about rural women and some of the realities they're confronted with?
I mean, I was thinking about rural women in particular, Faith, because if you think about a simple thing like hand washing, which we're all encouraged to do, the situation for many rural women is that there is no running water. So what that means is a lengthy walk to the nearest river to collect water and bring it back for all the people, including the men in the village. And that's, I mean, just the lives of people living under COVID, the lives of women living under COVID, it's really very difficult. And then going back to your point about the policies and what Tamara was saying about women standing together. I mean, the women that have benefited mostly from the Employment Equity Act are not Black women, African women, or Indian women. They're basically white women. Businesses have preferred to appoint white women because for some reason white women are in the so-called designated group, along with Africans, South Africans of Indian descent and colored South Africans. And for most CEOs who are largely men, as we know, it's more comfortable somehow to employ somebody who looks like me rather than an African person, regardless of the competencies of that person.
Yeah, I have to interrogate this, Terry. Terry, you've mentioned something so profound, and I have to interrogate it. Why do you think that is? It just makes no sense, 27 years into this democracy, with the realities that are being confronted, not to say that there's an intelligence deficit and even a talent deficit amongst even Black, Indian, coloured women in this country. Why do we see the persistence of a certain group, a preferred group over the other? What's going on?
Yeah. You know, Faith, I mean, I've been working in this area with my company Diversity for 25 years now. And the changes that are coming about are very few and far between. People generally feel more comfortable with people like themselves. And if you look at the average board, for example, board in companies, if you look at how many women, never mind white women are on boards as executives, it's absolutely pathetically few. But I think the reason for appointing white women is just that sense that they're like us and they'll do things like us. And, you know, that's what I imagine. Because if you look at the educational qualifications, even the experience that Black women have in businesses, and I'm using the term Black generically, there's absolutely no reason. And I think the only answer, Faith, quite honestly, is that white women must be withdrawn from the designated group. There is absolutely no reason for us to be receiving beneficial treatment in these times when we look at the figures of Black women in the same kind of businesses.
Certainly is an eye-opening conversations, lady, that we've just had with one another. But I think that the fight continues, the luta continua, so to say. And thank you so much, and a happy Women's Day for tomorrow. Wish you all the best. Tamara Mathebula, Chairperson at the Commission for Gender Equality, and Terry Oakley-Smith, MD at Diversity Change Management Consultancy. If there was ever a sobering moment, there was one for you, especially when it comes to the plight of women and how they've been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, to this story, a family in Cape Town says Women's Day for them is tarnished forever.